Dr. Michael Cohen, Chief Data and Technology Officer at Marketing Evolution, and Melissa Hopkins, CMO at Optus, will take you through the challenges of and solutions for implementing a cross-channel media impact measurement system in today's data privacy world. Michael, Melissa, take it away.
Hi, everybody. We are very happy to be talking to you about implementing a data privacy resilient cross-channel impact measurement solution. I'm joined today by Melissa Hopkins of Optus. And Melissa, why don't you say hello?
Hey guys, I'm joining you from Sydney, Australia. Just a bit of an intro on Optus. We are the second largest telco provider here in Australia, sort of known as a challenger to our big incumbent, which is Telstra, and we were recently identified as Australia's strongest brand. So hey to everyone.
Thanks, Melissa. And I'm Michael Cohen of Marketing Evolution, Chief Technical and Data Officer. And really excited to talk to you about this super challenging data ecosystem that we're facing now and in the future. And we're going to go through a presentation, but in a very conversational way, and learn about solution and learn about what it means to be operationalized at a major telco like Optus. So the outline today is really going to set up what this big threat is that we're facing in cross-channel impact measurement. It relates to changes in government monopoly policy, these sort of things that drive changes to the data ecosystem that's absolutely critical, or as I hear Melissa say quite often, the crude oil of data-driven management within the marketing organization. Then I'll talk a little bit about the existing sort of coalition out there that's forming around the solution for this, and I'll talk a little bit about a theory of everything and a call for a theory of everything, and then go into what a solution looks like for that, and then we'll focus a little bit about the conversation as it relates to Optus and their experience with implementing that sort of solution and what some of the key outcomes were of doing so. So here it is, the biggest threat to cross-channel measurement and management, and it's highly correlated missing and included data or information about customers and their experience out there in the marketplace. Knowing about that experience, knowing about that object of the CMO's affection, the customer, and the influence of that is absolutely critical to having any sort of data that can drive decisions and evaluate how well we do as marketers. But there's three key dimensions to that. One are the customers themselves. Are they over or underrepresented in the information that we have? Is the things that we do as marketers and the experiences and exposure that they have out there in the marketplace, is the full picture of that accounted for and controlled for? And the behaviors that they engage in all the way along their journey, not just the typical sort of funnel story, but their interaction with brands, with the platform, with bundles of products, and their evolution through the sort of product experience they have or service experience that they have with a brand. So this is, if you have missingness in these dimensions, you have a distorted picture, and if you have a distorted picture, your insights aren't really useful for decision making, and that hinders adoption and hinders performance based on data-driven decision making. Some of the specific reasons for this are changes in data availability. I alluded to privacy and some monopoly policy. We call that walled garden, limitation of data availability for this sort of decision making, and just measurement gaps. Our ability to record each and everything about everybody isn't at a place where we have computer chips and people, and we have that constant stream of data. So there are some measurement gaps. So being mindful of those is always important. There's intentional and unintentional selective identity solutions, especially some of the solutions that we're talking about in the privacy compliant world relate to opt-in, opt-out, and then this non-random arrival of people to consume media, to be exposed to media, and their path through that ecosystem. The things we do as marketing managers in our segmentation and targeting of consumers causes there to be a high degree of correlation in our delivery of media. And if we're targeting high conversion probability audiences, there's going to be upward bias in our measurement. And if we're trying to maximize reach, there's going to be downward bias in our measurement. And these things aren't often talked about. Overall, implementing a high-tech solution is difficult, right? Limited scientific and engineering expertise has brought a lot of pre-existing tools for prediction of the problem, and people have tried to assemble them in different ways or blend them in different ways, but they're not really aimed at recovering what we want to know about the customer. They're not an analytic solution that's aimed at analyzing or recovering the process that generated the data or the customer's journey. And having a limited cross-discipline training in computer science and social sciences is always a challenge to that. And having a solution for that is important. So one thing I want to call out is that the wrong solution is, a sequential blend of analytic approaches. People do that because that's what they have available. That's what they know. We talk about these things as being tried and true, but they provide an incomplete and biased impact measurement activation. And I'll talk a little bit about what a solution looks like that isn't a blend of analytic approaches. But, Melissa, I was wondering if you have any comments of your experience with this.
Absolutely, Michael. So look, I think there is incomplete and biased, but the worst situation is actually when the data doesn't talk to each other. And, as a CMO in the boardroom, it actually can work against you. So, MMM models tend to be based on regression, and, you're looking at 3, 6, often 12 months back. MTA models, which really focus on the bottom of the funnel, are quite granular in their detail, but based on sort of short term. And as much as there's plenty of people out there that say that they can web the two together, fundamentally the methodology is different. And I believe it's really important, we hold large marketing budgets that require a return on investment, that we can with clarity sit in a boardroom and be really clear on the efficacy of that. So many a time had separate models not talking to each other, and quite frankly, they make you look a little foolish.
Thanks for that insight. It's it might be the intuitive solution to blend approaches, but what we'll see is that it's really about getting down to the most atomic understanding of what we need to know as marketing managers, and having the data that represents the consumers we aim to influence. And that's really the starting point for when we think about what a solution looks like. But, as I mentioned, there's coalition forming out there around a call for a theory of everything. A recent HBR article talks about reckoning and performance marketing and brand building. This is not a new story of there being imbalance in the management across the sort of media that we use to influence consumers along the way and build relationships with them. We've often optimized down the funnel or optimized to lower margins in what we sell. We've seen that over the years, and bringing balance to that is something that's important. And as part of that, this article really cites another white paper by Google about measuring measuring effectiveness. And the 3 grand challenge is that it really requires a theory of everything, or a granular understanding of the ecosystem that we're operating in, and that within this theory of everything, having transparent model that blends the data of different granularities. So it's the model and the adding up, or the collection of the elements of the models of the people that bring together the data, rather than models of the data that have been brought together. And that's a very different idea that we'll touch on in the solution. But we've also seen in the World Federation of Advertisers, a call for an establishment of principles that are, take a new approach to cross-channel media measurement. And I argue that, in order to serve these principles, that a theory of everything, like the one that has been proposed in this this Google paper and in this HBR article, is required. Just wanted to quickly flash what those principles are for an advertiser as a North Star, this full life cycle measurement. And I want to emphasize that's not just about how consumers respond, but it's how they respond at the moment that you meet them, and how they came about to be in that moment. Right, so this is a story about exposure as well as response, and as well as behavior, and that'll fold into the solution. And then it's always important that data is there, it's evolving with a quickly evolving market ecosystem, and that the manager has the information they need when they need it to make the decision. Comprehensive strategic decision making, all the way down to the tactical deployment of the things that we do, and it's full funnel and its outputs. And when we use the word blend, it's really about the blend of KPIs that we manage through, rather than the analytic solutions that we use. Melissa, you care to?
Yeah, look, I think I'm going to comment and jump in on a couple of the next slides you're about to touch around exposure, because I think the danger with these types of models is we almost can turn into data nerds, and we get so caught up on the analytics and completely forget the basis of marketing, which is human interaction and consumption. If you go back 100, 150 years when advertising first began, it began because advertising equals commerce. But in between there needs to be an interaction. And I think more than ever in COVID, we really have to change how we approach and talk to consumers and understand actually the consumption moment. So the data is incredibly helpful, but I think where we're finding this quite exciting when we're sort of starting to build and use on it is what media channel is right and what message is right at the right time. So if I give you an example around obviously in the US, if I take Biden and Trump in a debate, our brand in Australia is all about being uplifted and optimism. That may feel kind of odd in that situation because consumers watching it have a different level of emotion. If I was running a superannuation or a 401k business in that element, then that might make sense because consumers are sitting there going, oh my goodness, I'm really worried about my future. So I think my call out here on exposure is don't get too caught in the data. Remember, there are human beings that more than ever have more messages, heightened anxiety, and you really got to think about how the hell your brand's going to connect and interact with them. Back to you, Michael.
Yeah. So the right-hand side of this, I think Melissa will actually talk about when she talks about the implementation, the practical challenges they overcame and we overcame with them in achieving that. But, once we get a sense of the solution, I think it makes sense to talk about that all important technology and info security related issues. So a solution starts with the the consumer and this exposure story. As I said, there's going to be three key dimensions here: the exposures, the behaviors, and the customer. So as we think about a customer, there are many different media channels that we reach them, and of course different tactics that we reach them within these channels. But things like sequence, frequency, and timing of these touches is absolutely critical, and that there should be a model of that, right? That's a non-random thing. People consume media differently, and it's predictable. And in a world where we're trying to predict or understand the impact of media, inherent or embedded in that needs to be a model or understanding of exposure within the unified solution. And it has to happen simultaneously. So the word simultaneous is one I'm going to use quite a bit in the next couple of slides. But that means that in your when you run the machine that is the model of the consumer, the exposure, the distribution of consumers and their responses, and the consumer journey and the choice model all have to be estimated at the same time, especially where these holes, because each model is going to fill each other in. The same way as we think about a game of logic where there's missing pieces that allow us to fill out or render the full and correct non-distorted picture of the market that we aim to influence. So that's absolutely key. You can't do this sequentially. You can't do response at some aggregate level, MTA at some other level, use some fancy analytic language about how you're going to blend them using, hierarchical priors or something like this. It's still just a kludge that doesn't simultaneously consider the exposure story at the same time as there's a response story, and the uniqueness, or as I call it, the heterogeneity in the marketplace or the customers. The decision moment is one that is really important when that happens relative to these other things, and then what that response is, that there's a different response, and then that response can evolve based on your relationship as a customer. So the model isn't of a KPI, or it's not of a particular profit center, a line of business or particular product. It's a model of your customer and your customer relationship. So it's actually almost a direct reflection of a well-organized CRM. Yeah. Finally, that customers are very different, and the opportunity across them and the actions that we take need to be different. In our ability to use highly targeted media not only allows us to mine more opportunity from the market and deliver more value to our customers as marketers, but it also causes there to be distortion in measurement, right? Especially when publishers and DSPs are going after high value targets. That means that consumers' response is correlated with the exposure itself. If you go back and look at the analytics approaches that people are blending together, that's a violation of the assumptions that they require, right? If the old adage here is like, this is like the pharmaceutical detailer going out and visiting the doctors that they know are going to take the prescription recommendations and then they follow them, or these are the club promoters that stand outside the door and deliver their promotion slips to get credit for people that were already going in the club. So it creates a distorted picture of the marketplace, the effectiveness of the media that's then being played back to advertisers and causing this cycle of inefficiency in the management. On the same side, lower value sort of opportunities might be very, very efficient on a cost basis. So altogether, these things need to be considered simultaneously. The exposure, response, and the model of customer altogether as one need to be simultaneously estimated. You can't do a kludge together sort of thing.
And I think actually for me, this is critical. This is absolutely critical, because the thing that terrifies me, and it goes back to the reference you made at the beginning, Michael, around crude oil, is that we tend to often forget the customer, and we get so analytical around the investment here, and you want to understand the output. So look, my crude oil analogy is data, and particularly a lot of marketing performance data is like crude oil. It's incredibly valuable, but but it is completely worthless unless it's refined. And that you need to refine that with sort of a human interaction. I've got a feeling, Michael, you and I could talk about this stuff for the next 2-3 hours, but I think we've only got a few minutes left. Yeah. Over to you.
Over to me. I just, wanted to create a quick picture of what it means to have data that's incomplete and having a simultaneously determining, solution that fills out the picture, that fills out the data picture, so that the data-minded people in the audience here can see that there are missing data that's being filled in as part of estimation. And it is like this logical puzzle that you need to have the information simultaneously in order to solve. And so, you can have an example where you have a bunch of user level data and you can have some aggregate level data and then be able to fill out, where there was a missed exposure because of some resolution issue at the same time as you're actually recovering that response. So the response estimation, the exposure estimation, the customer information is being simultaneously determined. If you do that sequentially, you're really missing a piece of the story. Just a little bit about what it looks like before, Melissa tells us more about things at Optus, that you can have segments that index really high in performance. That's just part of the story, right? If we're looking at a specific KPI, but there's more to it, right? There's several KPIs. There's different opportunities in media on a cost basis, and most importantly on an exposure basis, which has really been a missing part of the story. And having that exposure model inherent, not just in the measurement part, but in the actual planning and optimization part, now makes media planners more linked to the performance KPIs, because the reach and the targeting is based on the actual impact towards the key performance indicators, or the combination of the multiple blend of key performance indicators to achieve those ends. So you might have an audience that's really easy to get, might be really expensive, might be really easy to get and inexpensive, and then it might have different levels of effectiveness. So in your media plan building, you don't over-index too much in one direction or another if you look at the blend of reach across, say, different channels. But this also relates to the sort of messages and creatives that we hit people with. So I just wanted to move through this quickly and give Melissa a chance to really talk a bit more about the practical implementation.
Thank you. Do you want to quickly touch on this, or do you want me to kick off? Yeah, I'll quickly touch on this. Sorry. Basically, when you have the sort of solution, you're going to, bring that representativeness into balance. You're going to be able to fill out those data holes and in exposure story, and have a complete picture of response that lines up with the accounting ledger. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. So look, firstly, I'm going to touch on the fact that I don't know if it's a compliment or an insult calling Michael a data nerd, but I'm not sort of charts with lots of sort of data freak me out a little bit, but what excites me the most is I guess the output of that. But the implementation of something like this has been a bit of a journey for us at Optus, and I believe probably for any organisation, and there is sort of a time and cost commitment. Part of that is to do with privacy. We've got 300 data points that are ingested into this model. For us, it was incredibly important in Australia, even though that GDPR has not hit here as it has in Europe, that we would build actually a solution that was GDPR friendly. We additionally have something in Australia called the Telecommunications Act, which puts an extra slap on how we use our data around customers, which made things all the more tighter. I think we learned in this period that the US certainly is a little laxer when it comes to sort of privacy laws. But look, the main thing of the implementation here for us was sort of test and learn. We ended up building a stack locally in Australia, which has been incredibly important. We worked out that some of the surveys that worked in the US didn't work here in Australia. We have less people. We had to sort of work through into different partnerships with the likes of LiveRamp and Experian and indeed Lexa that sort of works through what we're doing. But it has been spectacular in trying to set it up in something that is privacy compliant, but actually can go down to the granularity of sort of hashed, anonymized individuals. And we understand not just the media exposure that our performance and ads have, but very much actually the sales impact, which is incredibly important. So if we sort of just touch on the outcomes from that, this for us is much, much more than a media attribution tool, which is just sort of talking about and ensuring that our media spend is spent efficiently and effectively. That is important to us. Obviously, our big competitor, the incumbent, the media budget is 4 times the amount of ours. So we have to think in a way that is a lot more creative and innovative. But what this has done for us is ensure that where we're putting media, that it is having the right impact. Indeed, what we've determined in some channels, the better thing is to forget frequency and move to an impact measure. We've been doing that, for example, in a lot of free-to-air TV over here, and then over sort of moving and shifting and doing high frequency in what we call screens. So, for example, YouTube. The other sort of key thing then is that if I build it out over and above the media attribution, is actually that the model is not only able to determine your average sort of cost per acquisition and the investment behind it, but we've built the model in partnership with Marketing Evolution. We now can determine the actual profitability out of every single dollar spent. That is amazing. And for us during COVID, when I'm sure like many of you, media and marketing budgets have been questioned. Indeed, our holding company Singtel in Singapore and my peers over in Singapore at Singtel gave back a large portion of their budget. This model was able to demonstrate to us that if we gave back marketing budget, that it in fact would really hit the bottom line, and that for us is really, really, really exciting. I could go on and talk about, I guess, sort of the cool impacts and outcomes, but I think versus Michael and I sort of having a bit of a chat and carry on about it, I'd really love to open it to questions to everyone. I'm probably best answering questions from a CMO point of view. Please don't start asking me any deep data science questions. Michael's your man for that. Anything you want to add before we wrap up over to questions, Michael?
No, that's. I really hope we get more into this area of what it means for the marketing organization when you can become driven towards profitability, and what the role is of the CMO in that world, alignment with other stakeholders. I'm sure that's what people are interested in hearing. So we'll take it to questions.
Great.
Thank you, Michael and Melissa. What a terrific session. Now let's jump over to the Q&A and see what our audience has to on their mind. I'll start with the first question here. We got a couple on the board. Do you believe in a blended approach as it relates to the use of first and third party data?
So this is an interesting question. As we clarified, it's not a blended approach as much as a unified approach that fuses data. And the answer, of course, is that, well, more information is always better. And just parsing that out in the right ways is the critical piece to filling out the full picture. So I'll leave my answer there. But, from a managerial perspective, Melissa, maybe you can share how that translates into how you actually use the data to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got, I think I touched on, sort of 300 data points that are sort of ingested into this model. It's probably worth sort of noting the bulk of that is first-party data. There's a couple of surveys and and some Google Analytics that probably sort of push in some third party data, but this is very much sort of person centric, and actually I have an allergy to the use of the words blended, because I believe that's actually what's got us into trouble with a lot of these analytics, because it's impossible to blend them. That's why we've sort of gone with a completely unified model.
Let's jump to the next question. How can one get started on a cross-impact measurement strategy so it doesn't turn into a long and laborious implementation? And if you have an answer to that one, bottle it and sell it.
Well, it's unfortunate that I cannot expense in Australia Botox, because I swear I got 2 extra lines on my forehead trying to do this. But look, it took us sort of 12 months to sort of push it in. I think for us the big thing was looking to other markets where they'd had some challenges, understanding that, having those sorts of discussions. But actually, we kicked off a steerco right from the start that had a general counsel sitting in it, a head of regulatory sitting in it, our head of data analytics, our head of data privacy, our CTO. And if I'm honest, I hate being hierarchical, but you need individuals in the room that can actually make decisions as you work through it, and it has to be everybody together, and that actually starts making it a lot more seamless. It cannot be marketing led, it's got to be whole of business.
Great. Here's an interesting question. How do your financial stakeholders validate your MROI reporting? And how do they ensure they're not just you're not just reporting marketing contributions, but the ROI in a data-driven decision making?
Absolutely. So look, commercial and finance were very much involved in setting up the original business case of us taking this on board, and helped us predict the MPV to start with. So that was really, really, really important. It's actually about the data sets that come out of it. So, the brilliance of this tool is it determines the actual profitability or GM of every single dollar spent. It can determine for us how much of our media spend drives demand, and everyone in this room will know that media by far is not the only driver of demand. It will demonstrate actually how many true sales came from what we've sort of been pushing out, and actually more importantly for us, as we're sort of trying to grow customer lifetime value, it starts actually identifying for us sort of brand consideration and loyalty. So it's crazy robust, and it's difficult for them to argue with. And it was one of the whole reasons we went with this, because the problem is with MMM and MTA models is there are holes when you've got, a pretty feisty CFO trying to sort of push stuff into it. I'm happy to share more offline if someone wants to, reach out to me on LinkedIn. But this absolutely sort of sits as a KPI, and I joke about the fact that, thanks, Michael, the system's so good now my bonus is linked to it. Okay.
So here's an interesting question. Any thoughts on the practice of virtual control groups or ghost ads for testing incrementality?
Yeah, one thing I want to make clear is that these are investments in data. They're not measurement approaches, right? So when you do a control group, a random holdout, or a random ghost ad, that is supercharging your data to provide information to an incrementality measurement solution to get a sharp and precise answer. This is very powerful and highly recommended, especially where we know measurement confounds exist, say in highly targeted media or media products that follow, high value conversions. So yes, that's something that should superpower your incrementality measurement. But people think it's an approach, but it's an investment in data.
Okay, now here's one directed at you, Michael. Michael, I know Melissa stated they have 300 data points. Do you consider that small, middle of the road, or large? And what is the largest set of data points you've ever seen or used?
Yeah, so when she says 300 data points, she means 300 data feeds. So within each of those data feeds, there could be thousands of data points or explanatory variables. Off the top of my head, I think their implementation probably has several thousand explanatory variables that'll grow as their data history and more the use of various marketing tactics that they test in market it begins to expand. So that, that'll increase, to tens of thousands. And that's in terms of explanatory factors. Now, the number of observations in terms of the size of the data set, that'll be, billions as you go. So processing that in an updated incremental way each time you update your incremental measurement, say on a weekly basis, you're taking in another probably 8 to 10 million observations of representative data. And of course, in a Bayesian updating or a learning framework, that's additive. So in terms of a sample size, you can see how it gets to a billion over time.
Okay, I'm going to go off the board a little bit here and ask, in this age of change and chaos and uncertainty, how do you think that will affect things going forward as far as baselines of comparison and the norms that we use to see how we're doing?
Yeah, look, so I'll touch in and then I will I'll pass over to Michael. So I'm going to answer probably a little bit more generally. I think that baselines are shifting and changing almost monthly. So, you've got to make a call and put a stake in the sand, but at the same time, you can't be as naive to think it's all going to be the same. I'm getting quite frustrated when people are sort of doing similar modelling to the GFC, for example, because this is not the GFC. And I think actually the way consumers now are consuming media, and particularly in a digital space and digital world, but at the same time things like free-to-air TV has sort of gone through the roof, is very, very, very different. So the great thing we love about, what we're doing with the guys at Marketing Evolution is that, we're adapting and testing and learning, and we'll go out with one plan for sort of 1 month or 1 quarter, and then we've got sort of tests on the side to see if we should have done something differently. I don't know, Michael, if you want to build on that at all.
No, that covers it. I mean, it's really having a solution that aligns with the way you work as a marketing manager. You've always tested things, built intuition about how they're working, and made decisions based on that. In a complex ecosystem, having a tool to support and make sure you're not missing any of those aspects of audience, creative, message, timing, all of those things. It's a lot to manage. So the technology needs to work the way you do.
Great. Michael, thank you and Marketing Evolution for your partnership with the ANA. Melissa, thank you very much for joining us down in the land down under and at a crazy time. So great presentation. We really, really appreciate it. For the rest of the audience, stay tuned for some more great content. Success in our rapidly growing digital economy hinges on data. It's the key to creating greater efficiency